So I'm gonna start this video off with something really controversial. I think that Sky Strikers are actually the best thing to happen to Yu-Gi-Oh! In a really long time. So now that I've got you guys all divided, let's talk about what I mean. So Sky Strikers recently came out in Dark Saviors, and it's a very popular archetype. It works pretty well as a standalone deck. It also works really well as a techable engine in other decks to provide advantage and free link materials. It's expensive too. Sky Strikers, the monsters are actually pretty cheap, but Engage and Widow Anchor are very expensive cards. Topping $100, that sucks, right? That kind of is actually one of the worst things happening to Yu-Gi-Oh! Is we're kind of back in this age of top tier decks costing $500 or $600 to get, because it wasn't always like that for the past maybe year or so, but we're back. But anyway, that's not actually what I'm talking about. The prices suck, and I'm not arguing against that. So don't get me wrong, I hate that this deck is expensive and it's hard to play. But what I like about Sky Strikers so much is the fact that it is actually an extremely strategic control deck. And it's strong while still actually being fair. That's something that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has not had in a very long time. So if we take a look at some of the recent top tier Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks of just the past year or two, we can talk about things like Spirals or Pendulum Magicians or True Dracos. These decks that all have very distinctive strengths and play styles, but all kind of felt like they, and this is gonna sound like a weird way to describe it, I'm kind of going off the dome, they all just had one strategy, one thing they did that led them to a victory. And maybe it makes more sense if I explain it better. So, okay, when you take a deck like Altergeist, right? They run a lot of traps and they just kind of try to shut you down. They don't really let you play at all, and they just keep bouncing your stuff with Silkatus. They prevent you from negating things. They run floodgates. It's similar with something like Paleozoics. It's just extremely defensive, extremely disruptive, and oftentimes frustrating to play against. True Dracos turbo their way out to Masterpiece, who is unaffected by a lot of things. He's really tough to get off the field, and the longer he stays in the field, the worse it gets, and it turbos that strategy out. And you can also take examples like Gokis or Spirals. Their goal is to extra link you as fast as possible. So they're running, these turbo-y decks. They just have nothing but combo starters, and the goal is to just pour as many monsters as you possibly can on the field. As many negates, as many disruptions, not let the opponent play, summon Ibli on their field. It's actually really similar to Pendulum Magicians from the past two formats, where it's just kind of about, getting out Vortex Dragon and Norito and having hand traps and just not letting your opponent play. What I like about Sky Strikers, and this is just my experience, I've used them a little bit online now, so I've learned a bit more about how to play the deck. It's actually really interesting, but that comes up a bit later. It's easy actually to fight against Sky Strikers. Now, like I said at the beginning of the video, it is a strong deck, but it is a fair deck. So whenever I face Sky Strikers, I don't get OTK'd. That's something that Sky Strikers don't do, at least not yet. So Sky Strikers, they will summon Kagari and then they'll end with Shizuku, and they will have a lot of cards set if they resolve multi-roll. But what you're fighting against is effectively one monster and then a handful of disruptive spells and traps. So yes, you have to deal with Widow Anchor, which can negate effects or steal your monsters. So it's a strong disruptive card. You also will have to deal with things like Jamming Wave and Afterburner. That's kind of the deck's ways of outing problematic cards. And monsters like Kagari can get really big and deal a lot of damage that way. The deck gets a lot of advantage because when you're resolving Engage and then you're also getting the extra draw from it, you're gonna be plussing. Plus, Kagari and Shizuku get additional cards back. The deck is almost like Spellbooks. It's kind of like getting this well of advantage and resources. It sort of reminds me of how Spellbooks used to sit behind cards like Spellbook of Fate and then use Grand Spellbook Tower to continue to recycle the Spellbook engine. It plays really similar to that. But the thing is, what most people complain about with Yu-Gi-Oh! Sky Strikers don't actually have. They don't make an unbreakable board on your first turn. They make a board that's difficult to play around, but really their goal is more about grinding it out. Sky Striker games don't end in one turn, at least not often. And oftentimes the other deck will get a chance to fight back. It's also really easy to disrupt Sky Strikers. They can have a tough time dealing with Droll Lockbird, dealing with Ash Blossom at times, even dealing with the new Ghost Spell card, which don't ask me why, I hate that card's $50. But anyway, yeah, so, I think that what's cool about Sky Strikers is it's you can actually beat them. You can actually play against them. Now, the objective for this deck is to kind of choke you out. It's going to get more advantage than you turn over turn. It's going to outpace you a bit. but I feel like it lets the opponent play Yu-Gi-Oh! You're not having to face an extra link board that's just full of monsters you simply can't get rid of unless you use extreme measures like evenly matched or raw sphere mode, where the game becomes like skewed towards if you don't go first, you lose, or if you don't have hand traps, you lose, or if you can't like immediately out this extra link board, you lose. It also isn't like Masterpiece Turbo, right? When that was a thing where it's just like, okay, I'm running Pot of Desires, Card of Demise, Organic Diagram, Terraforming, Upstart Goblin, all these cards just to like quickly get to Masterpiece, drop it, and then like you can't deal with it. You can't get it off the board, it's just stuck there, and you lose. And again, it's not like Pendulum Magicians where the board just ends up with like 3-4 negation monsters and a bunch of damage, and it's just like you can't actually play against it. Against Sky Strikers, you have a chance. You don't lose in one turn, you oftentimes don't really lose in 2 turns. And I think that that's just a lot of fun. And it's cool because being the dominant deck, that kind of like sets a bit more of like a status like symbol. It sits as a status symbol, I guess. Where it's like, hey, the best deck in the game involves skill and out-resourcing and baiting your opponent, not just busting your load all over the board because you want a dice roll. Or, you know, just turboing your way into like just one single boss monster that simply can't be beat. Sky Strikers are a super strategic, skill-intensive deck. Now, not everybody will necessarily like know or appreciate what that means, and I'm not saying I'm like a Sky Striker master, but what I've seen from playing online and reading feature matches, it kind of feels like Sky Strikers have a lot more depth than people think. There are a lot of intricate rulings that this deck is able to use. The fact that the spell cards like need to have like 3 spells in the grave to get their additional effects actually allows you to chain them in some really unique ways. In fact, there was a post on, let's see, what is it, Road to the King, about some interesting Sky Striker interactions. I want to actually link that down in the description. It's a really good read. There's some stuff that I didn't know about and I learned about, and it was really neat. And also, like, every time I play against the deck online, I feel like it's able to really outmaneuver me sometimes. I'm just like, whoa, that works? And then I'll read the cards and it's like, oh yeah, I guess it does work. So the deck does have to find like unique ways of getting around threat cards or dealing with problematic boards. It's a deck that can have a lot of trouble against non-targetable boss monsters, but it has ways to deal with them. It just has to find those ways. It can like squeeze its way out of a lot of tough situations, but they're not gonna get to do it easily. And that's something that's so cool. I think that it's just so much more dynamic and interactive than some of the, you know, top tier decks that we're used to, where it's just like you go second, you lose, or you can't out your Peach, you lose, you don't have a Kaiju, you lose. This deck, you know, you get to kind of play against it. It's a tough one, but you get to play against it. And players who really understand the deck and really study it will get more mileage out of it. I feel like it's a deck that over the next few weeks will get stronger because there's more and more to figure out about the kind of in-depth rulings. And it still has access to like some interesting kind of OTK setups and stuff, so that still makes it top tier. I'm not saying it's like the best thing to happen to Yu-Gi-Oh! Ever, but what I mean is just that playing against it feels dynamic, interactive, and possible, unlike playing against a lot of other top tier decks. So for that reason, it's why I think that Sky Strikers are one of the best things to happen to this game. It's a nice middle ground between a control strategy and something that's still really consistent and fast. And it's not like going to be the clear dominant best deck, I don't think, and that's kind of cool. It's not necessarily going to be Zodiacs, although it will be teched into a lot of things. I don't see it as a tier 0 contender, but I see it as a very skillful top tier deck. And it stands in kind of contrast to 2 other extremes. One extreme being like Altergeist, which are, you know, lots of floodgates, lots of traps, kind of slowing the opponent down. And then also, there's like on the other end of the spectrum, you've got Nightmares and like, you know, with Gokis and Spirals, where it's just like spam out extra link boards. So you have a really fast extreme, and then you have like a really slow, like kind of don't let your opponent play extreme. And then right there in the middle, you've got Sky Strikers. And that's why I really, really like the deck. Because for the first time in what feels like years, the top tier deck is just something that you kind of get to grind against and play against. So yeah, that's my opinion. That's why I think that Sky Strikers are a really good thing for this game, and I like them. It would be a deck that I would play, but it's expensive and I can't afford it right now. That said though, I mean, if anybody's interested in the deck, I do encourage you to pick it up if you're going to be competing at, you know, regionals and nationals and stuff coming up. And I'm excited to see where the deck goes. Now, there are going to be cards that will push this deck over the edge. I know when Summon Sorceress becomes legal, and if Crystron Needle Fiber eventually gets released, this deck is supposed to get really out of hand and really powerful. And at that point, I will reevaluate the deck. It probably will get toxic and might need to get hit on a ban list. But as it is now, I like what it brings to the table. I like that it feels strong but balanced, and I am glad to see it be what feels like the best deck of the game right now. I'd like to know what you guys think though, so let me know down in the comments. Do you feel that Sky Strikers are actually a good thing for Yu-Gi-Oh? Is it, you know, a fun deck to play or play against, or do you just find it annoying? And I'm not talking about the price. I know the price is bad. That's kind of outside of the scope of the conversation. That sucks, but I just mean like the deck and what it means for competitive Yu-Gi-Oh. All right, gone on long enough, so hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I will see you guys in the next one. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Thumbs up the video if you liked it, subs if you loved it, hit the notification bell. I'll see you guys in the next one.